so don't say anything bad about me now. I know that'll be hard. And is Auditor McCarthy on yet?
Eric, this is Pat
Yes.
McCarthy.
Hey, how are you?
Oh my heck, I can see pictures of everybody that are there. Hello everyone.
Great. Well, Auditor McCarthy, thank you and your staff for joining us. We appreciate it immensely. There's 127 county elected and appointed officials that have joined to hear from your office. We are expecting, as you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of coronavirus relief funds coming from the federal government. And there's a lot of curiosity and questions about accountability for those resources and what's going to be required to make sure that we have integrity in the manner in which we are expending those resources. So I just want to thank you very much for you and your staff joining us, and thank you for all that you're doing, just not for this, but the work that you've been doing for counties in both performance audits and what used to be the Local Government Performance Center and the FIT tool and all those things. So thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to you, and then you can introduce your staff that are going to speak.
Sure. And thank you, Eric, so much for having us have a conversation with all of the folks that are in this meeting. With me is Kelly Collins, the Director of Local Audit. Tina Watkins is the Assistant Director, and she also is oversees, along with Brad White, county organizations, and the four of us will be in communication with you today. Actually, we've got three experts and then myself. But I do want to tell you that it's kind of a sad state of affairs, but it's something that you can at least take some comfort in, is that we're not alone. We have been, myself and a number of my staff have been on numerous conversations with people at the national level to talk about this field of accountability, whether you're a state auditor, a treasurer, or comptroller across the country. And we're all kind of reeling, if you will, from the lack of clarity and the changing sand beneath our feet. So we've all been trying to put out a clarion call, and we've been doing this a while in the state auditor's office in the communications that we've had with you, which is to document. One of the things, though, we learned in the latest call with NSAA, the National Association of State Auditors, that we had, were at a conference last week, a virtual conference, was that it's even going to be important to save screenshots of what the directives are, because, as I said, the sand is moving under our feet. So it will help to justify whatever decisions that you do make. These, the word that's been overused at this stage of the game is these are unprecedented times. The CARES Act and other important issues that are affecting us here in Washington State and across the country. We've been trying to stay ahead of the curve and trying to address or be empathetic, know what you're dealing with. I come out of local government, as many of you know. So I'm sympathetic. I was in the recession as Pierce County executive, and was there even when we were clawing our way to recovery in Pierce County. So I am somewhat familiar, even though I think this is uniquely different in many, many respects, especially the stay home piece, the quarantining part, and the health component that's connected to this. We get it. You're trying to do the right thing while you're trying to face these cross currents. You're seeing your local revenues drop, but you're also seeing an influx of federal emergency dollars, and you want to make sure you're going to do it right, and we get that. We want to make sure you're doing it right. We want to make sure that we're all on the right page. Unfortunately, there is a lack of clarity, even though, again, the rules are changing as we speak. So we just need to be nimble to some degree. You need to document the standards that you're relying on when you're making those decisions. So like I said, screenshot them if you have to. I would say just screenshot them to protect yourself and to give the accountability component that you're going to have to be accountable why you did what you did. If you have any questions, you know, you all have an ability to utilize legal counsel. I would highly recommend that. And if you're really stuck, you know, I would contact Eric and the Washington Association of Counties to be able to help you navigate maybe some of those decision-making issues. Remember that on any activities or purchases related to the preservation of public health and promotion of public welfare, you got to consult your policies and like I said, seek legal advice from your attorney. You might want to even consider whether a policy adjustment is necessary before you even take the proposed action. Fully document, as I like to say, document your analysis and evaluation to support the action or decision taken. Document the source of your criteria again. So I'm just repeating myself, but the bottom line is we're going to be there to help you as well. We're not going to leave you alone. We don't have all the answers either, but I think I'm going to let Kelly take a shot at maybe answering a few questions that we've already been proposed, and she'll hand off to either Tina and or Brad. So Kelly?
Good afternoon, everyone. So we created a handout. I don't know, Eric, if you guys were able to disseminate that. We just shared that this morning.
It's going to go in the chat box right now.
Okay. So we tried to give you a takeaway, knowing we did get a few questions, it sounds like, this morning, and I'll let Tina and Brad address that. But in the handout that we have here, it is Pat's mantra. She was actually the first to come with the mantra to document, and that's like the foundation of any audit work. And so in the document, we talk about how, these funds that are coming through, and again, this is very reminiscent to the ERA stimulus funding that happened, I guess, almost a decade ago. But these funds should be treated like any other federal award, and that you should comply with all the terms and conditions of what everybody follows with uniform guidance right now. There's obviously some nuances, though, because of how fast the funding is coming. And as Pat said, the requirements are changing as we speak. At the conference that we were at the national level, the OIG was speaking about actually recommending, like she said, to take screenshots of the requirements that you're following because they're evolving so quickly. And so we've cited in the handout some CFR criteria that we would recommend that you share with your staff, and then additional resources that we've been collecting in our sharing as resources. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Tina to segue on with some of the more specifics.
Sure.
Hey, Kelly, will you have like a coronavirus page or a specific location where resources could be located on the state auditor's site that we could link to?
Absolutely. Tina, do you want to speak to that from the handout?
Yes,
Great,
I would. So on the second page, at the bottom of the handout, you'll see some links to where we have additional guidance just for COVID-19, and they're segregated for both cash and GAAP clients. They also link to other resources and materials. On the back of the handout, or the second page, there are some very specific blog articles that I thought were very relevant and real time for some of the inquiries that we've been receiving. We're pulling together some of the top resources for federal assistance that are most relevant. Hopefully it's not even too out of date yet, from April. We also had some great tips for spending specifically FEMA dollars, and 5 specific reasons why to document, and how to improve that documentation. I'm also linking you out to Municipal Research Service Center. They had done a great job pulling together very specific guidance on this topic. And then Commerce, which I've seen some recent guidance given out by Commerce, so we've provided a link to that. And then, of course, you are probably all familiar, but we want to make sure to remind you that we have local audit managers throughout the state that you're probably very connected to already. If not, maybe now's a good time to get to know them one-on-one. Give them a call if you need assistance. Our center resource database and folks at the center have additional information. And then we also have a help desk where you can ask specific questions of us, we're going to do our best to get that question to the most knowledgeable expert within our office and to get you the best answer we can given the materials that are out there. The number one thing that I'm hearing is that we are waiting for the feds to release the 2020 compliance supplement. That should give us the best guidance and direction for what is going to be expected under the audit process. We're expecting that in August. Now, we're in June, right? So that's 2 months from now. And I think that's why we're all hedging just a bit and saying the best thing we can say is keep a record of the guidance you were using, do your best to document it, and we're all going to have to just work through this together. I see some questions kind of floating at the bottom of the screen. Eric, I didn't know if you wanted to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, great. Do you just want to forge into those? Is there other overall comments that you all would like to make before we just throw it open to questions? I know there's a couple of them that have come in. If you're ready for questions or if you want to make any other overall remarks, let me know.
We brought Brad White with us, Program Manager for Counties, and I know Brad is eager to answer specific questions with me. So why don't we start answering questions, and that we want to leave it.
Great, thank you. So there was a question earlier about county fairs being canceled. With county fairs being canceled, is assisting individuals and entities financially allowable as they depend on the fair for operating income and have incurred expenses that will not be reimbursed otherwise? So we have a section in the CARES that allows us to support small businesses with grants. So is there capabilities to utilize any of those that for folks that would otherwise have been depending on the fair for operating income? You may want to take that one under advisement. That's a pretty
great
specific
question.
one.
I don't mean to provide you silence. I mean, if they're eligible right now, documenting their eligibility is number one. I don't know the specific answer to that question. If it falls within the guidance and you believe it to be allowable, Brad, I don't know if you can help me out with this one or if you want us to get back to them.
Well, I spoke to Felicia, who's our single audit specialist for the state auditor's office. Some of the questions we got this morning were similar to that one. It's something that she started to get a couple of questions just yesterday from cities about this, and she's working on doing some research to try to connect with Commerce because she's hearing some different things from different entities that she's talked to. So the best advice she can give, which is sort of things that Pat already touched on, was erring on the conservative side in terms of retaining anything that you have in terms of the guidance that you received, whether that's an email, a screenshot, anything that if Commerce told you that you were able to do something in a certain fashion, to retain that. And if she finds anything further, then she indicated that she would work on getting that out. But she hasn't actually spoke to Commerce, and as Tina had mentioned, the 2020 compliance supplement isn't out yet, and that's typically what she uses for her guidance to give out to entities.
So there's a couple of, Kelly, did you have something to add? Or you good? There's a couple of comments in here coming out of Commissioner Price Johnson in Island County. How will the state auditor's office provide consistency in the audit of these care funds when we are utilizing the guidance of 39 different county prosecuting attorneys?
Mm-hmm.
These funds have to be expended by October 31. In fact, we have many jurisdictions that are already either in the process to getting them out to small business grants or utilizing them to acquire new IT systems to support their businesses response or getting courts open. But we're not going to have guidance till August, and we have to have the money spent by October 31st. So I guess there's a little bit of a disconnect in timing.
Right. So, I mean, I think everybody's just going to, I think they're going to be spending the dollars to the best of their ability, given the guidance that they have on hand at the time. And that's why we're asking them to maintain it. So when we come there in an audit process, we can look at what guidance were you following. You know, you're not doing it randomly. You're doing it based on the best information you had at the time. And I think it's just important to maintain it so we can see evidence of it. It's a lot easier for us to read that email, even to see your notes. If you don't have an email, if you had a conversation, you're documenting who you spoke with, when was it? And that's better than just saying, well, because I did. And so having that support in whatever way you can gather it is, I think, what you're going to have to move from.
Great. Yeah, and we are getting, I will say, this might be an interesting time just to remind folks that we are getting very positive and quick response from Tony Hansen at the Department of Commerce when you have a question. So if you do have questions, we do really encourage you to contact Tony Hansen at the Department of Commerce. Obviously, you can go to the state auditors, but we really have been working with Tony, and he's been very responsive when there's been a question. So.
It would be, this is Pat, it would be really in your interest to have it documented in an email or some in writing, just because you would be in a position to say, well, this is what they told me, but you don't have, and they could, I just think you're better off if you have something in writing. We were on a call with the Association of Washington Cities recently, and one of the clerks from one of the smaller cities talked about how she just has a file folder, everything she's doing that's COVID related or additional monies, other dollars, she's keeping it collected in one location so she doesn't have to go hunt and search for everything. And I thought that was really good advice. It might be easier for a smaller entity to do that than a larger entity, but it's a simple process that could really serve you well. When all the dust settles and we're having to account for everything. And, the public has high expectations for transparency and accountability, now even more. So it's just incumbent upon you to just document everything that you're doing.
Great, thank you. Do you have thoughts on taxable income status of these grants to individuals and businesses? Do we collect W-9s and plan on issuing 1099s?
This is Kelly. I can jump in on that one. I think we wouldn't take a position on that. That wouldn't be our wheelhouse. So I think we would defer you to obviously an appropriate agency, the IRS on that, or Department of Revenue, depending on whatever status it would determine. So.
Okay, thanks. It's an interesting question from Commissioner Lannon. Would the recordings of guidance discussed on these calls be acceptable? So we record these calls. We've had numerous folks providing their input and guidance. I would assume that if we have a transcript or the recording from this, that would be acceptable to, at least in terms of providing a record of why you made your decision.
I would concur with that, Eric. We're in a brave new world now.
No. Yep. So, for example, we've had Department of Commerce on, and the Gov's office, and State Department of Health. We had a number of agencies that have been providing guidance on our work at the county level.
For audit,
and we are recording those meetings.
For audit purposes, I would want to maybe have a summary of the call or of the recording, just so it'd be easy to find.
Yeah. Okay, great. What kind of criteria are you going to utilize to guide your audit when it comes to these funds? There's nothing in the RCWs, correct? Or what would be guiding your audit? It is federal funding, so I think you actually do have some guidance.
Yeah,
or is that the guidance that will be coming in August? Go ahead.
I think that what some of the best information would be for what you currently do for your federal audits now. So the same kind of information you'd want to retain if there's A-19s that you're using for reimbursement, you'd want to keep that, any support that goes along with that. So if you think of it as some of your other federal grants like highway planning or something like that, you'd want to keep those same kind of resources. So based on what we know now, that's how we'd be audited. We'd be looking at the same kind of things we look at for other federal grants. But, you know, it's a difficult time because we don't have the information from the federal government yet. So that could change with the 2020 compliance supplement. So that's why the best advice is to just save everything. And that's taking kind of that conservative approach so that if you don't need it, that's all right. But it'd be better to save it and not need it than to not save something and find out later that they expected you to keep X, Y, and Z. So anything you get from the federal government, keep that in your records.
Great, thank you. I think that's what your handout also references. I will give you one example that we've been trying to get confirmation of the White House, and we've got screenshots and downloads and printouts where the White House has said that it is eligible to match coronavirus relief funding as your FEMA match, yet we have not seen the official notification from either Department of Treasury or FEMA on this issue. In fact, there's someone just took this, I think Kathy Spohr out of Pacific County, I think just put that in the chat box. And that's an example where we're taking screenshots and we've got the hard copy with the White House letterhead that says, yes, you can do this. But we've yet to fully see anything official besides one paragraph in something that came out of the White House. And so we're making choices based off of that. And I think some folks are still a little leery that that's not enough. So I'd be curious to see what your perspective is on that.
This is Kelly. I can jump in on that one. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing as well. We're seeing that the criteria, and even the OIG at the federal level is acknowledging, is that the criteria is evolving and changing. And again, that's, I guess all we can do is fall back is to the mantra, the document, the trail of what you support. I think we all recognize the situation. This is evolving and changing, and this feels like what we experienced with the ARES stimulus funding almost to 100th power here. So I think you're doing what we would have asked you to do, is to document everything that you have to support your decision going forward. And I think because of the timing, we're all recognizing at some point you've got to make the decision to, I guess, move forward. And we have a help desk, and we have, people that you're connected with at our local teams that you're welcome to reach out to. But this is obviously not the best situation. But I think documenting your basis for your spending, as we keep saying, and what criteria and support you have to make that moving forward is, I think, the best that we can ask for you to do for the audit process.
Yeah. So there's a question in a very ambiguous criteria that is used in a couple of instances for coronavirus relief fund, which is it needs to be, quote, necessary. And so I think there's question is, will the SAO use criteria to determine if an expense is necessary? And if so, how are you coming up with that? Or are you just simply going to look back to and give some discretion and credence to what a jurisdiction determines as necessary? Or is there a broad criteria that you will be utilizing at this point?
I think it's going to, again, I'll jump in and maybe hand off to you, Tina. I think it's going to be for each government to support why it was a necessary expense. And I think it's, again, just supporting your analysis or basis for it. I think we would agree that it's kind of not very specific criteria written. Tina, do you have more that you could add to that?
I do. Often when I'm auditing, in the past, I've been asked to determine whether or not something was an emergency, and what's an emergency to one maybe isn't to another. So we've always depended, just like Kelly said, on the entity to document their process for how they determined it was an emergency. So I think a similar thought process would be implied here. You're going to know if it's necessary. So we appreciate that documentation that you provide us.
Great. Are there more questions? You can put them into the chat box. You can raise your hand as well. I don't know if one of the staff can kind of cruise through the list of participants. We have about 140 participants. You can unmute yourself, and also if you are online, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Go ahead. Feel free to do that. If you're on the phone, you can press *9 and unmute yourself. If you are on the Zoom platform itself, you just click the phone button to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question. Or you can type into the chat boxes. Okay, this is an interesting one. We've had this before, and it's one where I don't think we have a definitive answer yet, and that is whether paid administrative leave that was provided while offices were closed is an allowable expense. I don't know whether you have delved deep enough into the U.S. Treasury guidance yet or have seen anything at the SAO office around administrative leave as an eligible expense or not. But that is, I think, an ongoing question that a number of jurisdictions are trying to discern at this point.
This is Brad. I haven't heard that question answered myself. I haven't seen anything on that, so I wouldn't be able to answer that one.
Yeah, this is Kelly. I would concur with Brad. I don't think we've delved enough to know for sure the answer to that. I do know that, you know, we have seen everybody being encouraged to track all expenses related to, you know, the pandemic and to, I guess, I think we're all watching to see what criteria is going to be provided to support, you know, the related expenses as eligible. But I know we as an office haven't seen enough yet to know, to provide an answer to that.
I think this is one that if you could begin to do a little analysis of, we have heard this for probably the past 6 weeks. So if you could, that would be really helpful. We really would appreciate it. I think we also have had that question into Commerce and haven't seen a response yet as well.
Okay, we will.
Let me see. Yeah, thank you very much, Kelly. Commissioner Price Johnson, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
I really appreciate you being with us today, all of you from the State Auditor's Office. But I guess I'm very clear about the documentation for federal audit for those government expenses that are related to the COVID outbreak. I'm still not clear about small business grants. What is your guidance for documentation from those small businesses that we should be keeping a file on? Can you be a little more clear about what you'll be expecting? Thank you.
This is
Brad, do you want to lead on? Okay, go ahead.
I was wondering what the source of the funding is for that specific program you're speaking of.
Yeah, so the Coronavirus Relief Fund specifically, and we can make sure you get that. And we have an agreement with this. Each county will have an agreement with Commerce. So the CARES funds that we are getting from the federal government that's being passed through from Commerce allows for us to give grants to small businesses that are being affected by the pandemic.
Right.
And so we now have authority to actually give them upfront grants, just not on a reimbursable basis as well. That's been clarified by Department of Commerce. So the question is, what do counties have to have back to support those expenditures that would be necessary?
So I think this is what we were referring to a little bit earlier when we were talking about making sure that, one, eligibility is key, and I believe that Commerce has been starting to answer this question a little bit. I think I saw traffic on it recently. It's something that Felicia Zanadel, our subject matter expert on federal grants, is currently researching, so I'm hopeful that we'll have even more guidance out. So at the moment, like as I walked into this call, we were encouraging everyone to document what you could, and then having the pass-through agency or Commerce telling you what you can spend it on or what you need to keep is very helpful. So we're asking you to retain those communications. But I'm hearing potentially eligibility is key, but I can't confirm it completely as it's just so fresh. I mean, I'm just hearing about it today.
So
I'd love to give you the exact answer for sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So Department of Commerce has made it clear that they have no requirements of the documentation, that would be with your office there and with the federal funding audit program. They're being very flexible and have been made it really clear that their office is not requiring documentation for audit purposes.
Okay. Well, uniform guidance tells us that we need to have support for those disbursements at this point, and I think that's why we're all very anxiously awaiting the next compliance supplement. I get that this is a bit circular, and is why we're encouraging everyone to keep copies of the documentation of the communications you're having with, like, Commerce, what their expectations are. So
yeah, the eligibility in the Treasury guidance is expenditures related to the provision of grants to small businesses to reimburse the cost of business interruption caused by required closures. And so we will have counties, as many counties are providing as much as 30% of their coronavirus relief funds to support small businesses and the interruption caused by these required closures. So the question is, hey, what are they going to have to retain to be and to have available during this? And because they're about to give monies out to these small businesses and not knowing what they need that small business in to hold as a document or submit for either reimbursement or have available if they give an upfront grant to that business, which is eligible, but what's the documentation required?
This is Tina one more time. This seems like a really consistent question amongst a lot of your members. Maybe it would be best if we crafted a question that everyone is most interested in, and we can work on helping to provide more specific guidance and share that back through WASAC so that you can have a more concrete. We'll do our very best to get you the most concrete answer we can.
That'd be great. And as I indicated, this is one where the jurisdictions are in the process of starting to allocate these dollars out right now. So
right.
Great. Thank you. I will send you the treasury.
Kelly.
Go ahead.
If I could just jump in, I like that idea that Tina's proposing of coalescing a listing of questions we can work on, I guess. But with regard to respond to the comment regarding Commerce not needing documentation, that just flies into everything I've ever experienced with auditing federal funds. It's all about the documentation, and so I guess I would caution you to follow that. I guess if anything, we would err you to take be ultra conservative in this experience we're going through, and just to, pretty much document, everything you can think of. And so I guess I wanted to speak up to feeling like that advice from Commerce that there shouldn't be any documentation doesn't jive with anything I've ever experienced with auditing federal funds. And so we can work on more specific answers to get more specific about what key things need to be documented. But, again, even at the federal conversation, it's all about everybody tying down what you are relying on in the moment, even from an auditor perspective, because I guess my concern is not only from the recipient and user of the federal funds as you're handing the monies out, we're even ourselves tracking and documenting what guidance we're going to follow through in approaching the work. So. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Pat. I would agree with Kelly. I think you're just going to need to err on the side of, justifying what you've done. And if I was back in local government, that's what I would want my folks to do, because we're just on uncharted waters here, and because there's just hasn't been the sideboards that, the criteria clearly delineated. Even when it's clearly delineated, there's a difference of opinion, but we're in this world of the unknown. So you just have to justify everything that you're doing, and that will serve you well. I think it will serve you well.
Yeah, we probably should double check with Commerce, maybe simply saying for their capabilities to reimburse, they may not need documentation. That doesn't mean that we don't need it. So we probably should get some clarification on that
Great.
as well. Let's see. Anyone else want to unmute themselves and ask the question? Commissioner Swanek, you want to mute yourself and go ahead and get a couple of things in the chat box.
Well, I just, one comment I typed up there was, I know people are talking about specific guidance and people are talking about being very constrictive or restrictive in how they do this, but that isn't the point of these funds, like say normal road funds or other things are. These are for a pandemic, for an emergency, to help people, and the basic guidance in the federal government says get them on the ground fast. So I guess I'd ask the SAO to be a little less critical within reasonable bounds of how these funds are used. Because if we follow the guidance, it's pretty broad. I'm exploring right now whether we can use these to help the kids out that can't go to fair but already bought animals and have obligations there. Because they're kind of micro businesses. They bought something, they feed it, and all of a sudden they can't sell it. So I think we need to watch that aspect of it. It's not the normal.
This is Pat, but that's a perfect case. You just outlined a perfect case why you used the logic you did to disperse the monies. It's that kind of contextual, this is why we're doing what we're doing because this is what we feel is meeting this need. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Your justification of why you made those decisions.
And say hi to John when you see him too.
Will do.
But yes, that's exactly what I'm asking for is, okay, we had a reason, it seemed reasonable based on what we knew, and we're documenting it. What else?
Commissioner Swanek, I'll be happy to visit you in jail, Commissioner Swanek.
Hey, they got to get me off the tractor too.
Great, thank you. Kelly, did you want to say something also?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, all right, great. Let's see, there was, I lost my place on our chat box here. I think this is an interesting dynamic, and it's the question coming out of from someone about who ultimately would be accountable if we follow the guidance. For example, we've got something in writing from the Department of Commerce or the White House letterhead that says we can use it, and then later on we get a management, or there's someone that's suggesting we now are going to have a finding or a management letter, whatever it might be. Who ultimately, I guess this is the fear that I think a lot of folks are having, that we think we made the best decision at the time based on the guidance we had, and then the guidance changes. I guess I'm hearing that if we documented well and we made the decision based on what was available and in front of us at the time, we're fine, or what are the repercussions? Talk to us a little bit about that.
This is Kelly. I'll start off. I think these are unprecedented times. I think the closest thing I can even equate to it is when the ARA funds came out, and that was like this. But again, this is even more. I think we're all just going to have to approach. I can't say definitively one way or another, but I think we're going to work with you, understand the situation. I think, again, I feel like if you have good documentation there, I think we are going to want to be able to take that into consideration and, provide, the best assessment we can on it. I mean, I understand your concerns and stuff, but I don't know if I can necessarily say one way or the other how this will roll out. I mean, I would want to be able to advocate to following whatever guidance and support that you have in place at the time. I think we're going to, from an auditor standpoint, be in the same situation as you, is trying to understand what criteria we're using. And obviously that criteria could have changed over the period. And so that's why we're going to be looking to you as a local government, when you sent it out, what criteria did you have? And the more you can support the transactions that you're going on with what you have, the more basis that I'll have to support you in your compliance. Tina, would you have, or Brad, add anything more to that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, we haven't received what we need to audit to yet, and if we had, we would be sharing that with you. So we're going to find out later what the expectations of us are, and we'll have to adhere to those. But please remember, no matter what the reporting level is, it's written, and we try very hard to make sure that everyone's perspective is included. I'm hopeful that this is that we're able to get clear guidance as quickly as possible and just share it out there so that we have the least amount of reportable items that we can.
Great, thank you. If you could, I think there's a couple of comments about seeing if the SAO and the Commerce could get on, really make sure that they're in sync in providing guidance. That might be very helpful too. So perhaps we'll leave that to the two of your organizations to kind of sync together with Tony Hansen and the feedback he's giving us, and making sure you all think that it's accurate, so we don't get crosswise. That would be great. And we can get you Tony Hansen's, if you don't have his information, we can make sure we get you his email and phone numbers, and you can wrap back around to him. Lori Larson. Lori, you want to unmute yourself and ask your questions specifically about that? You can either unmute yourself. If you're on the phone, you're probably on Zoom, so you can just unmute yourself with the phone box and chime in. Go ahead, Lori.
Maybe not.
Yep, you're on. Good. Go ahead, Lori.
So just wanting to, early on, department heads in our county were told buy what you need for coronavirus out of existing budget. And I'm thinking things like supplies to sanitize, hand sanitizer at an increased level than we would have otherwise gone out and bought. How do we turn around now and knowing that some of these different funding sources, like for instance the election specific CARES grant, goes back to March? How do we did buy initially?
Lori, you're breaking up a little bit, Lori.
Well, I'm not sure that that's going to work. So
okay.
Leave it to my question in the chat box.
Yeah. So in the early pandemic, departments were told to buy COVID supplies out of their existing budget capacity. Is there any particular guidance on how to document and thread the needle to demonstrate that these COVID funds, from whatever source, whether they were elections, FEMA, CARES, are not supplanting existing budget allocations? So folks might have utilized their existing budget capacity at the time, but we've got a pretty clear direction that it was supposed to be non-budgeted money as well. So any guidance you can give us on that?
Brad, can you help us out with that one? I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Well, I think what they're saying, which I have heard, is that you're not supposed to spend this money on things that were previously budgeted, but then you were given guidance to use the pre-existing budget to buy the COVID supplies. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, a good example would be, let's say you had a general supplies line, and it had money for your operating supplies for, let's say you're a road department, and so you had money budgeted for supplies, and instead of purchasing a certain type of safety equipment with it, maybe you ended up purchasing personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, all those things necessary for COVID-19. And so yes, it was budgeted, but it wasn't budgeted for that purposes, but you did have a supplies budget. So I think folks are really struggling to say, well, yeah, I had the supplies budget available, even though we had intended to utilize it perhaps for pesticides. We had to change our direction. And if you kind of go through, I think folks are really just kind of struggling to say, well, is that eligible or not eligible?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I'm wondering if, again, back to documentation of what you spent the money on, how it was related to COVID-19. Not sure if you're setting up a separate fund for some of the money that is being spent directly for the code, if there's a way to do a journal voucher to move that. And I think what's tough, as we said on some of the other ones, we haven't gotten guidance to be able to speak to say, what would you do in that situation? But I can add that to the list of things to ask about to see if we can get some answers on that.
Yeah, and this is Tina. For Lori specifically, I mean, I think what we would do is to take the criteria for the concern that you're specifically looking at, match it up to exactly what happened and kind of walk through it. So I'd love to connect with you to see if I can help do that. And then that might be good to share with others. But I do agree. I saw a comment from Larry Stafford that it's likely substantially different. And I'm hoping that would be the way that would end up. It's really hard to answer the question without seeing the criteria in front of me, but it makes sense that we should be able to get there. Just would require a little time to walk through it.
Yeah. So Tina, I sent you, I mean, this is the interesting element. I sent you basically the for you and Brad, the 4-page, if you had not seen it, the coronavirus relief fund guidance that we are kind of working from, which is pretty nebulous, and yet also provides a lot of nervousness to our folks then as well. So.
Right.
Great. Got some more questions in the chat box. Let's see. There's a question about the expense wouldn't exist without COVID-19 or be for a substantially different purpose. So yes, I think there is some. I think folks that do believe we have some guidance in that as well. So thank you for that, and that's in item 5, I think. Are there other questions in the chat box that I've missed, Melanie, Derek, Jamie? You unmute yourself and read it. I was skimming through them. Or does someone need to unmute themselves and ask a question? Any other additional questions? We've got a couple. Go ahead, Melanie.
I was just going to say I didn't see anything.
Okay, great. Well, we have just a couple more minutes. If anyone wants to ask any last-minute questions, we will happily share with big smiles Tina's information and Brad's contact information so that they can ask you all sorts of questions. Definitely want to extend my deep appreciation to Auditor McCarthy and certainly to Tina, Brad, and Kelly for joining us in the hot seat today, because I know there's just a lot of questions about what we can and can't do. Last minute questions from Mary Ann Nichols. We understand that we will be reimbursed for our reimbursable unemployment costs. Will we bill this grant for these costs, or will they come from somewhere else? And Kelly, do you know the answer to that, or anyone? I don't think I need to go back and.
I don't think we know that where the source of the funds will come from. Brad or Tina, is that your assessment as well?
As well, I'm unfamiliar.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So this is Pat. Just in closing, I would want to say that the frustration that is being expressed and the anxiety, we have had those same feelings in these federal conversations, these national conversations we've had with the National Association of State Auditors and the National Association of State Auditors, Treasurers, and Comptrollers. We have the same feelings that this is just this nebulous, your term, Eric, is not something that, is not in keeping with the work that you do. And we get that. It's not in keeping with us being that outside set of eyes. We all go by what the rules say. And when the rules are this undetermined, if you will, it makes everyone anxious. And so that's why we're saying, whatever you do, just document. and give your justification. And, you know, these are, as Kelly said, these are unprecedented times. We will act accordingly, as you will. And the more conservative you are in your approach, it may be that you just make a decision that this is the right thing to do for the right reasons, and this is why we did what we did. That is the kind of context that I think is going to be important, and it will serve you well. So I hate that we're not able to be as definitive and clear as we'd like to be, but that's the way it is right now with regards to what everyone's dealing with across the country with these large sums of money from the federal government coming either directly into local governments or through the state. And so we're just going to have to ride this horse, and we're going to have to make sure that we can justify the things that we're doing based on the criteria that we get at that moment in time.
Well, Auditor McCarthy and your staff, we definitely thank you very much. We find ourselves always loving flexibility, and now it is scaring the crap out of us. So we greatly appreciate your joining us today, and look forward to working closely with you over the next number of months as we have questions around the uses of these funds and making sure that we are accountable for how we actually expend these resources. So, and be transparent in how we do that. So thank you very, very much. And we look forward to more conversations with you. For the other members, I think this is, we will talk to you all again on Friday at 3:30. I think we've got a couple of things queued up for that. If I recall, staff, I think we actually have someone from with some food bank folks and food security coming in to talk with you all about that. And I think we also have someone from the governor's office. So is that right, Melanie or Jamie?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. All right. Well, Kelly, Tina, Brad, Auditor McCarthy, thank you very much for all that you're doing for us at the state level. Appreciate it immensely.
All right. Be well. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.